Come to order. I know the minister is very tight in time and has to leave at 10 to 9, 8:50 at the very latest. So pursuant to Standing Order 1082, committee will do a study of Report 7, Compliance Activities, Canada Revenue Agency, of the 2018 fall reports of the Auditor General of Canada. Welcome, Minister. The committee just wanted to see you one more time in 2019. And welcome officials from the Canada Revenue Agency, Mr. Hamilton, Commissioner, and Mr. Gallivan, Assistant Commissioner. So welcome, and I understand that both the Minister and Mr. Hamilton have fairly concise opening statements, and we'll go from there. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to thank you and give you more information this morning on the compliance activities of the Canada Revenue Agency report, which is part of the 2018 fall report of the Auditor General of Canada. This morning, I am accompanied by Bob Hamilton, Commissioner of the Canada Revenue Agency, and Ted Gallivan, Assistant Commissioner, International, Large Business, and Investigations. First, I would like to thank the Auditor General for his important work. I welcome his recommendations regarding the Canada Revenue Agency's compliance activities. Since my appointment as Minister of National Revenue, I have always worked toward a fair and equitable tax system that meets the needs of all Canadians. In contrast with the Conservatives that made cuts, and our government has made the decision to reinvest in the agency and services to Canadians. Today, I want to reiterate that I am firmly committed to making sure that all Canadians are treated fairly and equitably by the agency. They must receive the benefits and credits they are entitled to, and assurance that everyone pays their fair share of income tax. In light of some recommendations that were made, what the Auditor General is telling us in this report is that we can always do more. We can always do better. That is why I want to mention in October I announced the appointment of the first Director for Data Compliance within the agency. We want to have a culture that makes sure that Canadians are the priority for our services. And this is why we accept the recommendations regarding our reporting and our processes. I can assure you that we will continue to put every necessary effort into making these improvements. Regarding reporting, Canadians expect us to be able to better report on our results. To do this, I believe that every organization should have access to reliable data and indicators to make the best decisions. We have already started the work with the 2016 plan to estimate the tax gap, and we will continue to do this work in collaboration with our new director in the area of data. Regarding processes, I agree that the law has to be applied consistently and fairly in all regions of the country. We work with millions of Canadians and businesses. However, each case is different. Every case is important, and some are more complex, others simpler. However, in all cases, the compliance programs have only one goal, and that is to make sure that the tax system is fair and equitable for everyone across the country. This is the assurance that we must give Canadians. In response to the concerns the Auditor General raised, the agency has developed an action plan. A copy has been submitted to your committee. This plan illustrates the measures that will be taken to address the recommendations from the Auditor General, in addition to describing the approach that the agency intends to adopt in revising its internal processes and procedures. A fair tax system is one that works for all Canadians. As Minister of National Revenue, I will always be open to putting measures in place that ensure the fairness of our tax system and that make it easier for Canadians to meet their tax obligations. Thank you very much.
For a copy of the fairly detailed action plan. Turning then to Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the Auditor General's Report 7, which looks at the compliance activities of CRA. As I mentioned during my appearance yesterday before the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, we operate in a very diverse and complex environment. Our agency's compliance activities can range from performing audits of large multinational corporations to validating individual Canadian T1 returns. In each instance, however, the CRA works to promote the awareness of and ensure compliance with the laws we administer so as to uphold the public's trust and confidence in the tax system, and we endeavour to do so in a fair way.
This environment becomes even more complex when tax schemes cross borders. In fact, a significant compliance challenge for tax authorities around the world has been addressing the effects of base erosion and profit shifting.
And the Joint International Task Force on Shared Intelligence and Collaboration. We work closely with international partners on better exchange of information and to share information that helps identify tax cheating. It is within this environment that the agency will address the Auditor General's recommendations. As you're aware, Mr. Chair, the Auditor General's Fall 2018 report assessed the CRA's consistency regarding the application of compliance measures for various types of taxpayers across Canada. The report also considered how the performance indicators for compliance activities were measured, monitored, and reported to Parliament. The Auditor General made recommendations in the areas of consistent treatment, timely processing, and performance measures. L'Agence a élaboré un plan d'action pour mettre en...
CRA has developed an action plan to address the Auditor General's concerns. As the Minister has already mentioned, the CRA has committed to taking action in all areas identified by the Auditor General, while at the same time recognizing the differences in our compliance issues and challenges across the various taxpayers with whom we interact.
A copy of which has been provided to members of this committee and to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, outlines in greater detail the specific actions being planned and taken. In the interest of time, I will not go through the document point by point, but would highlight the CRA's intention, among other actions, to clearly indicate the timelines for audit activities, as well as developing guidelines for seeking court orders to compel sophisticated taxpayers' cooperation. Establish guidelines for the administration of taxpayer relief provisions, and develop guidelines to understand the delays attributable to the agency as opposed to those of the taxpayer. The CRA is putting more emphasis on education and communication with taxpayers to achieve long-term compliance. At the same time, we are determined to identify taxpayers involved in tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance, both domestically and internationally, and to ensure that those who choose not to comply with the law face the appropriate consequences. These efforts support the CRA in building and maintaining confidence in the fairness and integrity of Canada's self-assessment tax system, increase awareness of the agency's compliance activities, and deter tax avoidance and evasion. Finally, I would note that in the past 2 years, the CRA is aligning its operations and approaches based on previous recommendations of the Auditor General. In fact, the CRA has made measurable progress in its operations in specific areas based on feedback provided by the Auditor General in the Fall 2016 and Fall 2017 reports. I believe that the agency has demonstrated that it follows through on commitments following the Auditor General reports, and the same attention will be paid to the recommendations made in Report 7 of this report. I welcome any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you both. We will go to 4 6-minute rounds, I guess, according to the clock. Mr. Sabera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bonjour. Soyez les bienvenus, Madame la Ministre.
Welcome, Minister. I would like to ask some questions. Minister, you have made a commitment to change the culture at the CRA to treat all taxpayers as important clients. However, the Auditor General has concluded that the Canada Revenue Agency does not treat everyone equitably. Do you think that this is fair? I would like to thank my colleague for his important question and also for having asked his question in French. Congratulations. I want to say that as soon as we formed government, we knew that we had a legacy at the agency that was negative because of decisions that the Conservative government had made. The Professional Institute of the Public Service developed a report and published it, and it said that reckless decisions had been made that had devastating effects in the agency, especially because of the 2012 budget, which cut $250 million from the budget and eliminated 200 jobs. So 900, and then there were more cuts, $900 million, 3,000 jobs. So, of course, there were cuts in services. There were no proper investments in technology. When we formed the government, we knew that our priority was to serve our clients properly. So we invested in customer service and put record funding into tax evasion compliance services. We have therefore taken steps to make sure that taxpayers are at the forefront of our concerns. We have taken many steps to change the culture. The work has started. We have 40,000 employees at the Canada Revenue Agency, and it is therefore a big ship that cannot turn on a dime. But we are working in that area. The change of culture, the cultural shift will require ongoing work. Minister?
Which for taxpayers is the end of their fiscal year. And what message would you like to send the taxpayers now that they'll be filing their income taxes in a few months? And I think we have done a number of things to simplify the system, to make it more efficient. Filers can file online. We've obviously reduced taxes for 9 million Canadians. But if you can comment on the resources that we put in place to allow filers to file by telephone in some instances and to simplify the system for all Canadians.
I want to thank my colleague for his question. I remain determined to improve the services offered by the CRA to meet the needs of all Canadians. What we have implemented over the last 3 years at the agency have put our taxpayers at the center of our activities and priorities. So, as I have mentioned, we are putting in place a telephone service, an automated service that will allow 950,000 Canadians to have access. We have launched a VSAP service. We have launched 2 rounds of meetings to provide better services for small and medium-sized businesses so that we can help SMEs find ways with us to simplify processes affecting them. We have improved the tax services. In February 2019, we will be opening northern services in the territories because we feel it is important for people in the north to have equivalent services, which is not the case right now. We have implemented a new platform for the call center, which will be up and running very soon. I can also tell you that the call center will be receiving calls from small businesses. And on December 3rd, we also migrated other services. We have the data service center that will make sure that horizontally all the data will be collected from all sectors. We have also simplified the forms and letters that the agency used. We have mail out of the packages that Canadians need. And so we are always trying to make sure that taxpayers are having their needs met better.
Kelly, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this report that we are studying is quite extraordinary, just a horrific read in that it describes how the agency has failed to apply the Income Tax Act fairly to all Canadians. And fairness of the system is critical in a self-reporting system. Canadians need to know that their agency is applying the law fairly. Minister, I'd like to bring to your attention on page 6 of the report. This is going to be particularly troubling to Canadians to learn that the agency would automatically allow the expense, would automatically disallow the expense as an eligible income tax deduction. That's when the agency requests a document and a taxpayer fails to provide it in 90 days. That's if you're an individual, not, for example, somebody with an offshore transaction, where it goes on to say that the agency, if the taxpayer has offshore transactions, would be allowed months or even years to comply, and in some cases the agency, having not obtained the information at all, would just close the file without assessing any taxes. So how is that applying the law fairly to Canadians and having and achieving a client-focused agency?
Je remercie mon collègue.
Thank you for that question. To begin with, I would remind my colleague that the horrors at the CRA took place during the 10 years under the Harper government. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, it is clear in black and white that the problems resulted from the cuts in the 2012 budget when the Conservative government decided to reduce the budget at the CRA by $250 million and cut hundreds of jobs. It is important that Canadians be treated fairly and that all taxpayers pay their fair share. We know, too, that all tax files are different. Some are simpler, some are more complex. The scope of the request for information and the cases, the complexity makes different. People can be in contact with the agency to be able to ask for information and get it.
A little later, we know you're short in time, and I'll let Mr. Kelly go to his second question.
And we've got more time later. Minister, it's extraordinarily disappointing to hear in your 4th year as minister to have no better answer to this report than to blame the past. It's not about how many people are employed at the agency, Minister. It's about treating taxpayers fairly, about applying the law fairly to all Canadians. in the report, the Auditor General also describes how when the agency makes mistakes and the agency itself fails to supply information on a timely basis or gives out incorrect information, that there is no consistency in how the agency deals with penalties. So penalizing a taxpayer when the agency itself has made a mistake is extraordinarily unfair to a Canadian taxpayer, and the inconsistency around relief from penalties when the agency is at fault is something that I'm sure many Canadians would be very upset to hear when reading this report, and it would be familiar to many Canadians who have had this experience. Can you tell the committee now, what are you doing today to ensure that when the agency itself makes a mistake, that it's not penalizing taxpayers?
Je rappelle encore.
I would again remind my colleague, I do want to ask him for his question, which is a very important one. When we look at the cuts under the Conservative government, it's clear that there was no vision of what the CRA was to become or have as priorities toward taxpayers. And there was an important repercussion of that. We have the call centers that did not have adequate equipment. There were cuts to the services, the hours when the call centers were open, cuts to training. So I don't have any lessons to take from the Conservatives. I have been minister for 3 years, and we have been better able to meet the needs of taxpayers. Last year, the Auditor General's report looked at call centers. We have modernized the call centers, and we had the SME services migrate in the beginning of December, and we have other services migrating as well. We are providing training to our call service workers to be able to better meet the needs of our clients. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Minister for her time. She has only given us 30 minutes, which is much less than we usually have with ministers. And so I'm disappointed by this limited time we have with you. The Auditor General was very clear. There is a two-class system. We have on the one hand regular taxpayers and then others. We know that some groups have longer time frames. They have better access, they have benefits, so the rich are being treated better than other taxpayers. At the highest levels of the Trudeau government, we have people like Mr. Colbert, Mr. Bronfman, who are influential, and they are mentioned in the Panama Papers. So is this why we have this dual system? I want to thank my colleague for his important question. As I've said, I am determined and have been since I became minister to making sure that Canadians are treated fairly and that everyone pays their fair share. But every case is different. Some cases are quite simple and some are very complex. The complexity and the scope of the request for information influences the activities of the CRA. People can communicate with the agency and we can take into account their request. I asked whether rich taxpayers like Mr. Bronfman and Mr. Colbert are influencing the government. We know that Mr. Colbert, Leo Colbert, who was named in the Paradise Papers, he contributed to your election campaign. Do you not think that this sends the wrong signal to Canadians, that rich taxpayers that are mentioned in the Paradise Papers and that donate to your election campaign, do you think that sends the right signal? In my view, everyone will be treated fairly. But what about Mr. Colbert, who is mentioned in the Paradise Papers, and he contributes to you and to your campaign and the government? Everyone will be treated fairly and will continue to be treated fairly. This is a former senator who has been mentioned for tax haven work. As I've said, everyone will be treated fairly and equitably. But why did you not refuse that donation? What appearance does this give? What signal does it send to taxpayer? Everyone is treated fairly. And I can tell you that if you came to my riding, you would see the reputation that I have, and you would find that everyone sees that I treat all Canadians fairly. That's unfortunate, because when we have rich Canadians in Montreal that contribute to your election campaign and that they are mentioned in the Paradise Papers, and we know that the Auditor General has mentioned that rich Canadians are treated differently. But I want, with the rest of my time, to come back to another point. Last year, in December 2017, you mentioned that you are recovering $25 billion in tax evasion and that you are working on getting this money, this $25 billion, efficiently. But how much of that money has actually been recovered at this point? We have invested his record amounts of money, almost $1 billion, to deal with tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. We hired 1,300 auditors, and we carried out twice as many audits for offshore activities as the Conservative government did. This has led to $12.5 million in court-ordered recoveries and $45.4 million in 2016-2017. But out of the $25 billion you promised just a year ago, how much has been recovered? I will ask the Commissioner to answer. No, we will have him after you've left, so we will ask him then. But just one last quick question. The last time you were here, you said that 38 convictions had been delivered for compliance activities, but you mentioned in the House 78. How many of those were for offshore activities? So over the past 3 years, how many convictions have you had for offshore tax evasion? As I said, we have hired 1,300 new audits. We have carried out twice as many audits as the 10 years as were carried out in the 10 years under Conservative government. We have 1,200 files. We have investigations into over 50 cases of offshore activities. But if that had worked, we would have had convictions by now. Thank you.
I get 5 minutes, I guess.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Minister, thank you very much for being here this morning. It is very kind of you to come here before the committee and appear. I want to express my disappointment about the campaign being led here by the opposition members to taint your reputation. We know that anyone who makes a political donation is subject to the same rules, and all Canadians have to declare their political donations, either individuals or others. I think it's $1,500 now, the limit. It's very disappointing to hear what they've had to say, but thank you for being here. I would like to raise a question, because when I listen to the two opposition questions, it seems that they are trying to make us believe that the agency is not doing its work properly to deal with fraud mentioned in the Panama Papers. Could you tell us about the progress you've made in analyzing the information in the Panama Papers in your agency? Thank you for that important question. The agency has identified over 3,000 foreign entities that are linked to some 2,600 Canadian owners. 80% of those have been looked at, and we are making sure that any Canadians mentioned in the Panama Papers no longer have access to the voluntary disclosure program. I have set up a committee to investigate how we can better apply the rules for tax evasion cases and to tighten the rules under the voluntary disclosure program to make sure that this works effectively. During the first year of my mandate, I worked closely with a number of countries to make sure that Canadians with assets in those jurisdictions no longer had access to the voluntary disclosure program. So we are making efforts to ensure that all Canadians pay their fair share. We have provided the agency with tools to better ensure compliance. And people have disclosed information before the agency began examining certain jurisdictions and having the contacts with the various countries. Can you assure me, Minister, that these actions will be effective in dealing with Canadians that were mentioned in the Panama Papers? You didn't hear my question. I understand why. There's too much conversation on the other side. Can you reassure the committee that these are unprecedented actions to deal with Canadians mentioned in the Panama Papers? Yes, of course. I want to remind all committee members that under Jean-Pierre Blackburn, who was Minister of the Canada Revenue Agency at that time, that the point of
I've just been informed that the minister will be violating the committee's request to stay for an hour, that she'll be running out the door in order to avoid tough questions on the Auditor General's report. She has said that she's just being informed now. It's quite astounding that the minister, having received a damning report about demonstrating her personal incompetence and failure, that she will be heading for the hills and avoiding tough questioning in just a few moments. And if I could just finish, Mr. Chair, that is my point of order. These are important questions for which the minister is accountable to Parliament. We have a report here. It says that if the agency asked an individual to provide a receipt for support a claimed expense, and the taxpayer did not provide that receipt within 90 days, the agency would automatically disallow the expense of an eligible income tax deduction.
I think
by contrast, actually, my point of order is very much in order, and I do have the floor. By contrast, for those with offshore transactions, it goes on. For example, banks and foreign countries, they could take months to to provide information to the taxpayers' offshore transactions to the agency or the taxpayer.
Your point of order was on
no.
time of the minister. You're getting into the Auditor General's report.
You're right, and if I could conclude, Mr. Chair.
And it's said on the agenda.
Mr. Chair.
It's said on the agenda. Just
Mr.
hold
Chair.
on. It's said on the agenda. I'll give you time.
Point of order.
It's said on the agenda, 8:15 to 8:45 for the minister. The minister agreed to stay till 8:50. Yeah. She has a cabinet meeting. You understand when you got a cabinet meeting called, you're a cabinet minister, you got to go.
Now, I understand.
The commissioner,
you said I was going to get a chance to speak.
The commissioner of the agency is here till 10:15, so there will be appropriate time. We always have the opportunity to call the minister back again.
Yeah, what I do understand about being a minister is that ministers are actually accountable to committees unless they have something to hide or are unable to answer questions.
That's
Here
good.
we have, no, excuse me. We have a report from the Auditor General, who is an officer of Parliament. It is our duty to ask questions about this report. This minister, all she's been able to do is read a few PMO talking points before running out the door and avoiding any questions about the report itself. You Mr. Chair, have allowed that to happen. Just as you have done repeatedly with other ministers where you have stepped in to protect them against answering tough questions on behalf of taxpayers. Our duty here is to ask questions about this report. So I asked the minister if she will do her duty and stay here for an hour, just like this committee, with a Liberal majority, asked her to do. Will she honour the request of the committee and stay for an hour? Yes or no?
The minister has a cabinet meeting to go to. I know, Minister, can you have to go to a cabinet minister meeting, I understand. And when we sent out the agenda, we outlined in the agenda that we would only have a half an hour with the minister due to that fact.
She might. I think she's going to agree to stay for an hour.
Madam Minister.
I think she's going to agree to stay for an hour.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say to my colleague, Mr. Poilievre, that if you had wanted me for longer, I get up at 4 in the morning, so we could have started the meeting at 6 a.m. I would have been pleased to be here. But unfortunately, I have to attend the Cabinet Committee, so I have to leave now.
To leave, I'll let Mr. Fergus finish his question, and then we'll turn
point
to the
of order,
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair. I have a point of order.
Minister, thank
point
you
of order,
for.
Mr. Chair.
I'll go to your point of order. Thank you, Minister, for coming, and we're left with the Commissioner and Deputy Commissioner, Mr. Poilievre. And you've got about a minute left.
Yes, so this report says that taxpayers are facing harassment because the individual taxpayers face harassment so they can't provide a receipt within 90 days. While wealthy international bankers
Mr.
who have offshore foreign transactions,
you're getting into the Auditor General's report,
foreign transactions are allowed to go for months without facing any accountability from this minister's department. And that is actually something for which we have a duty under the standing orders to ask questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Poilievre,
you might not like that. You might want to prevent tough questions from being asked of witnesses because you want to protect your government.
Could we come to order? Could we come to order? You're the next round of questioner. You'll get an opportunity to have 6 minutes.
You can come to order whenever you're ready to come to order. But I'm going to continue with my point of order. I'm going to continue with my point of order.
What's your point of order?
My point of order is we had a half an hour. This committee, even with a Liberal majority, asked for an hour. That minister did not answer a single question. She was asked pointed questions about this report. Instead, she buried her head in PMO talking points and went on, and if I could finish, and continued to burn our clock. The 5 minutes we had to question her.
6 minutes.
Oh, thank you. 6 minutes.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
The 6 minutes that we had to question her,
already have
in order to get to the bottom of the details in this report, you consistently prevent us from cutting in to defend our time against that kind of abuse by ministers in your government. And then half an hour before she was supposed to leave, she gets up and runs out the door instead of answering questions about a damning Auditor General's report about the abuse of individual taxpayers and the leniency of wealthy international tax evaders. This is at the heart of what we're supposed to be doing in the Finance Committee, and I appreciate you've said before you don't like tough questions. You've said you've interrupted me. You have indeed, Mr. Chair. You've interrupted me when I've asked for yes or no questions from Minister Morneau, and now today you've allowed this minister to avoid responsibility to Parliament for a damning Auditor General's report by allowing her to testify only a half an hour when the committee asked for an hour, and by allowing her to burn what little time there was by avoiding the questions altogether. So frankly, it is the job of the chair of the committee is not to be the bodyguard of the minister. It is to facilitate parliamentarians holding ministers accountable. That is the nature of our parliamentary system.
All right. On the point of order, Mr. Fergus and then Mr. Fragascatis. And it's on the point of order.
Monsieur le Président, merci pour mon point d'ordre.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to raise a point of order. My colleague on the opposition side has violated my rights as a member here because he interrupted my time to question the minister with his remarks. Yes, it was a point of order he wanted to make, but he prevented me from taking advantage of my time to be able to ask a question of the minister. And that's unfortunate because she was just getting to a point that I found very interesting. Mr. Chairman, she was raising a point about a former Conservative minister, and Mr. Pulver has just realized at that point that she had to leave after half an hour. It was clear in the notice of meeting and in the information we received that she was here to answer our questions, even though she had a cabinet minister. A cabinet meeting. And I feel that my rights as a member of Parliament have been violated because he used my time that I had to question the minister. That's unacceptable. We need to find a way to have the mics shut off when the chairman asks for that to be done. I wasn't able to ask my question, or at least I didn't get an answer to it because of this.
I would also suggest that there is the commissioner is in charge of the agency, that the Auditor General's report is before us, and it might be wise to take as much time as possible as parliamentarians to ask the commissioner who's in charge of the agency, yes, the minister is as well, to draw out the facts. But I'll go to the other comments in the point of order, and then maybe we can, and if you want to challenge the chair, you can do that. Mr. Fragascatis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Last thing I want to do is challenge the chair. All I want to say is that I know I speak for the vast majority of the members of this committee to say that you've always run a fair meeting. And my colleague opposite ought to know, if he checked his email, which is not very difficult, that the agenda for this meeting was sent out in a very timely way. We had an opportunity to know exactly what was planned for this meeting. And each point of order that he raised, not only did it interfere with my colleague's questioning, as he rightly points out, it deviated entirely from the substance of the points that were raised. So his point of order, if I can put it this way, was not a point of order. I don't know what you're pointing at there. But we need to really be serious about the work that we're doing here. And I worry that my colleague is not as serious as he claims to be.
Okay. Mr. Dussault.
Well, my point is on related to the point of order. Is my question is, if the committee asked for 1 hour with the minister, who decided that 30 minutes was enough, and why do we don't schedule another time to get the full hour of meeting that is supposed to happen with the minister? So I was wondering how this situation happened in the first place.
When the invitation was for 2 hours for both. When the minister came back, she could only go for an hour due to a cabinet meeting. The cabinet meeting got moved up earlier, and therefore we agreed that we would start at 8:15 rather than 8:45, so we had at least had half an hour with the minister.
But why there was no discussion with everyone around this table to see if this was an acceptable situation? If the committee agreed in the first place of 1 hour, who decided that 30 minutes was enough?
Yeah. Mr. Point of order. If I just...
I think it relates to the issue. The only date that she could accept with any time was today. Otherwise, we'd end up into 2019. And so I'll take responsibility for accepting for today, because I thought it was better to see her have her come in at least for half an hour before the end of the session. Before the adjournment for the Christmas break, and rather than going and leaving it to 2019. At least we have the commissioner here as well for the rest of the time.
Is it what?
Well,
is this your plan?
I would think if we're going to go to 2019, you'd want to go to basically an hour, then not a half an hour. A half an hour is really difficult because you only get 4 questions. And I understand that. Mr. Fergus.
If I recall correctly, Mr. Chair, and I'd love if the clerk could take a look at it, and I know that what was discussed was in camera, so I feel very reluctant to raise this publicly, but I'm pretty certain that the motion that we had passed was to ask the minister to appear, and there was no time allotted to that. I think the normal practice is, of course, we would like her to be here for an hour, but the fact that she came before Christmas, before we go off back to our ridings for the next 6 weeks, which I thought was very generous of her, she made the accommodation to come right away. So if I remember clearly, there was no mention of an actual time.
Okay, I'll give you what it was agreed to, and then we'll turn to questions for the commissioner and deputy commissioner. On committee business, it was agreed that considering the statement in the minister's mandate letters from the Prime Minister that ministers be held accountable to parliamentary committees, the committee requests that the Minister of National Revenue and officials from the Canada Revenue Agency appear before the committee for briefing on the Tuesday, November 20, 2018 report published by the Auditor General of Canada on the compliance activities of the Canada Revenue Agency. That in their briefing, the Minister and officials explain to the committee steps being taken to address concerns highlighted in the Auditor General's report, and that this meeting be televised. That was the motion. It didn't specify time, but it's usually standard procedure that we have the minister for an hour. And in fairness to the CRA and the minister, they have outlined their action plan to us as part of that request in our meetings. So. We will come back to Mr. Fergus. You've got about a minute left if you want to go. Then we'll go to Mr. Poilievre and down, I think Mr. Poilievre, right? And down the line from there, okay?
Well, Mr. Chair, the question that I would love to have had answered was the one where the minister was going on before we go into the next round of questions to the commissioner. Commissioner, I don't know if you were able to continue in the line of response that the minister was about to give in terms of providing us with some testimony or some a public reaction from a former minister for national revenue, Jean-Pierre Blackburn.
Yes, I'm actually just, Mr. Chair, trying to remember exactly where we were when we left off when the minister left, but I'm not sure that I can add very much to that particular issue. I'm happy to respond to other questions, but off the top of my head, I can't really think of anything productive that I could or should say in that regard.
Thank you. We're in 5-minute rounds, and we'll start with Mr. Poilievre, then Mr. McLeod.
Yes, Commissioner, the Auditor General found in paragraph 732, and I quote, "For example, if the agency had asked an individual to provide a receipt to support a claimed expense and the taxpayer did not provide the receipt within 90 days, the agency would automatically disallow the expense as an eligible income tax deduction." That's for average taxpayers. By contrast, for others, such as those with offshore transactions, we found that the time frame to provide information was sometimes extended for months or even years. For example, banks in foreign countries could take months to provide information on the taxpayer's offshore transactions to the agency or to the taxpayer. Why is it that this agency, under the direction of your Liberal minister, goes after small pizza shop owners because they don't have a receipt for filling up their tank of gas for a delivery, but the international tax evaders who have offshore accounts get months of reprieve from pursuit by your department, according to the Auditor General?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me respond with a few points. First off, I would say one of the important jobs that we have at the agency is to make sure that we administer the system as fairly as possible and that it's perceived that way by Canadians. And so this notion that somehow big taxpayers can get away with something that regular taxpayers can't is something that's important, that we want to make sure that we don't administer that way, and I believe that we do a very good job of administering the system fairly for all. So I thought that as an opening point is very important for us, because if Canadians don't have trust in us as administrators, that's a problem in a self-assessment system. So point one. Point two is that the tax system that we administer does obviously apply to a diverse range of taxpayers, as you've pointed out, from multinational corporations to small businesses to individuals. And we need to recognize...
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, we have 5 minutes here to ask questions. It was specifically about why people with offshore transactions don't have to provide evidence of their transactions, while individual taxpayers here in Canada must do so within 90. Very specific. I don't need it to be explained to me that there are various types of taxpayers. That's sort of elementary. We all know that. So I'm specifically looking. It's just for your reference. It's paragraph 732. 733. I appreciate this should have been a question to the minister, but she's obviously run for the hills because she doesn't want to answer these questions. So we can just stick to the actual question rather than trying to give us a pedagogical background on the different types of taxpayers who exist. We already know that.
Mr. Poilievre, look, the Commissioner has the opportunity to answer. And you're always a sticker on time the other way. He didn't have half the time you took to ask the question, so it's fair. I try and be fair in terms of my ruling, and I think the Commissioner has the right to answer how he feels is the correct answer and give a full explanation. You may understand, because you've got the Auditor General's report in front of you, but somebody who may be watching this may not have the same explanation as you do. So I think it's fair, and I'll not take time away from you based on our discussion here. Mr. Commissioner, you have a little time left to answer fully.
And I will respond. So that's the important aspect for us to understand, that we want to administer fairly across the broad range of taxpayers, but we do obviously deal with them. In this particular example that was raised in the Auditor General's report, I would say that we are reviewing the issue that he raised for us, that we understand that in dealing with diverse taxpayers, sometimes to get to the right answer, it takes more time with some than others. So we are looking at both ends of that spectrum, though. In the case of people who face the 90-day deadline, there is always an opportunity for them to come to the agency and request more time. And we try to accommodate and show that flexibility where we need more time to get to the right answer. And on the large multinational complex cases, we did commit in the action plan to look at our rules there and whether we can come up with clearer guidance as to how much time should be taken and when we need to take stronger action. But there is at the base of it, and this is why I started with my response, that we have to recognize that in order to get to the right answer so that the right amount of tax gets collected, sometimes it takes longer in certain situations than it does in others, and we need to have a system that accommodates that and administers the tax system fairly.
Well, we have no doubt that you have different approaches to different people. That's quite clear. I agree with you on that. The Auditor General's report did find that you're very aggressive when it comes to Joe, the local pizza shop owner, but you're very hands-off when it comes to the international tax evaders, which is consistent with the approach that this government has taken. Sometimes, and I'm quoting, the agency did not obtain information at all, and the file was closed without any taxes assessed, the report says, of the pursuit of offshore transactions and international banks and other organizations that have money stashed away abroad. And the average taxpayer, Mr. Commissioner, looks at that and says, boy, that must be awfully nice to be able to just keep the information away from the tax agency long enough that CRA just quietly goes away. Unfortunately, as you know, that is not the approach of this government when it comes to everyday working taxpayers, nor has it been with respect to people with diabetes. The Liberal government denied thousands of diabetics their right to the disability tax credit. Your agency violated the law in doing that. The law is very clear that these people were eligible. You then did a reassessment and admitted that you were wrong to deny 1,326 of the originally denied claims. However, there are 941, I'm wrapping up here, 941 individuals whose applications have not been re-disallowed. In other words, they're not going to receive the tax credit they thought they would. And now we find out you're not going to inform them of that fact. Why would you deny these people the right to know they've been refused and thereby prevent them from filing an appeal to that refusal? Why not just send them a letter saying they've been refused so that they have the opportunity to appeal that refusal?
I'll take the last part of the question, the disability tax credit, and then I'll just turn to my colleague Ted Gallivan to comment on the offshore activity. On the DTC, you're right. Last year we did conduct a review of applications that came in a certain time frame, and certain of those were deemed to be eligible after review, and certain were not. About 900 people, as you've mentioned, were found to be still ineligible after the review. And we have heard from a number of those people, about 600 I believe is the number, but I'd have to verify that. And we are looking at options of what to do about the other 300. Normally, if we do a review within the agency, say we undertook on our own to look at a case that was denied, and we feel that it still should be denied, we wouldn't proactively communicate. But we are looking at options in this case to make sure that we do the right thing. But maybe I'll just ask Ted to comment on the first part of the question.
Just 2 quick points vis-a-vis offshore. First of all, it's not just the agency's opinion that these matters take longer. The Income Tax Act itself provides 3 additional years for the agency to finalize compliance work with respect to transfer pricing, offshore assets, offshore trusts. And so the complexity is recognized. The second thing is I think we're confusing the burden of proof. When there's a credit claim, the CRA, whether it's a multinational or regular taxpayer, provides 90 days for somebody to substantiate a credit because the burden of proof is on the taxpayer. When it's an offshore income situation, the burden of proof is on the agency. So in the interest of fairness, you actually want the agency to spend more time to get that information because the burden of proof is on our auditors to substantiate that income should have been paid, and that's why we're taking additional time. So I know it can seem like we're giving them a break, but actually more time in the saddle for our auditors is yielding a more appropriate tax reassessment.
Thank you both. Mr. McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the presenters today. I have to first of all say how much I appreciate the improved relationship we've had in the North in the last couple of years, and the improved communications I think is really starting to show in the number of complaints that I've been receiving over the years. And the minister stated it quite clearly that the process has to be fair and has to be equitable across the country. And so I think there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of work has been done. But my question is regarding, it's my understanding that CRA has recently appointed a chief service officer. So I want to ask how this appointment is going to help in improving fairness at the CRA.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, indeed, we did earlier this year appoint a chief service officer at the agency, and it's a piece of a broader exercise we have to try to improve service at the CRA and to take a more client or taxpayer Canadian-centered approach. I think in the past, we have found ourselves sometimes working in silos within the agency, that one part is doing something that's not as connected as it should be to another part. We have to recognize that when we provide service to Canadians, we're providing a range of services. It could be telephone calls, it could be correspondence, it could be the website, and we need to take an approach that looks at it from the taxpayer's perspective and that we're providing the services that we need to. And so we did name a chief service officer in that regard, and her job is primarily to look at the way we provide service to Canadians, both digitally and paper, but look at it across the board so that comprehensively we can say, yes, we're doing things that make sense for the taxpayer. We're listening to the feedback that they get. We have different channels to get feedback, whether it's public opinion research, complaints that come in. Make sure that we're listening to that, and then further make sure that we're taking that information and looking for ways to improve, whether it's how we respond to phone calls or the accessibility of our website. So that is really what her job is going to be, and it's really, if I think of it, it's integrating the activities of the agency so that we can better focus on how we can provide services to Canadians better.
The previous government shut down the only offices in the North for CRA, and I know when I first got elected, the number of complaints that were coming forward were there was quite a few, and I think it was a real challenge for many people to try to get the attention of the CRA through the process that was in place, and I'm happy to see that there's been some progress in the communications, and maybe we could talk about that. I really believe that services have to be equivalent right across this country, and that includes the North. And there's been some progress. Can you talk about some of these things? Because we've had issues with the Northern residency deduction. We've had triggers that are calling for audits, and some people have been audited over and over and over again, but things seem to be moving forward. Can you talk about what you're doing in the North?
Yes, Mr. Chair, happy to talk about that. Again, I think as we look at the services that we're providing in Canada, one of the steps that we have taken in that regard is in the North, where we're doing, I'd say, three things to try to improve services there. The first is to provide more access to CRA employees, whether putting somebody in an office up there to be able to answer questions in the North, I think is something that we are doing, and I think will will hopefully help provide better information to taxpayers. What this is all about, and what you'll see in all of our service activities, is trying to explain better to Canadians what's required, what are their tax obligations, how can we make it easier to comply. So we think that providing offices in the north will help in that regard, and we will make CRA people available in those offices, and we will be looking to expand the community volunteer program, which goes out and tries to help people fill in their taxes. So that's one key element. The second is looking at the northern residence deduction and seeing if, as you say, we can uncover, are there any systemic reasons why we might be verifying over and over again the same people. So we're looking at the algorithms that we use that decide how we test, how we review certain cases, and we're also again trying to make sure that we explain better earlier on, have good conversations about what the obligations are under the northern residence deduction. So that's the second place where we're trying to do a better job of communicating and explaining, and even looking at our processes to see if we can simplify it. And then the final area was looking at a regulatory change on the low-cost airfare, just to make sure that we didn't have in place a system that was too hard for people to comply with, that you have to pick the lowest airfare on that particular day to be eligible for it under the program. And we're looking at ways to simplify that, and have advanced a regulatory change to that effect. So those are the pieces that we think will help, and hopefully will reduce some of the complaints that we get in the north, but it's part of a continuing effort to improve our services.
Thank you both. Before I go to Mr. Richards, I did have a question in this area, a chief service officer. I guess what at our constituency offices, and I assume most members' constituency offices are in the same situation, we'll get to where the last stop. And we'll get calls from constituents in tears trying to deal with CRA. And either they've tried, because there's no front office service anymore like it used to be fine when people used to go in, be able to sit down with somebody, in my case in the Charlottetown office, and talk it through and see what they could do. Maybe their bank account's been frozen, and whether for right or for wrong, there is a feeling by many constituents when they're talking to a CRA representative on the phone after they get through the queue, sometimes they had to wait a long time, that they're treated like a criminal. And there's got to be a different attitude in that regard, because then we get the calls, and we try and deal with through our contacts. I will say that for MPs, most of the time, the contact we have with CRA, they do their best to help us out, and through that help the constituent. But just to put that on the table, that there is a problem for constituents from what they feel the attitude of the CRA individual to them is like. They just feel like they've been treated like a criminal, and it may have been an innocent mistake on their side. It may have not. Their bank account may have been frozen, whatever. But that is a problem that I'm just telling you, Commissioner Hamilton, that we have to deal with. And will the Chief Service Officer help in that regard? And is there any thought of bringing back frontline services at CRA offices?
Mr. Chair, I think very definitely the Chief Service Officer will help with the kind of perception that you have talked about, which I don't like to hear about, frankly. I don't want people to being treated like criminals on phone calls as a starting point. There may evolve conversations down the road, depending on how things go, that people have to face the consequences of their actions. But we are very much about changing the culture at CRA to, as I've said, being service provided to the taxpayer and the client. And what I would like to see us do, and what we are doing, and where the Chief Service Officer will help, is focusing more on the conversations about educating both sides of the conversation, really. Us making sure that we're explaining to Canadians what they need to do and why. And sometimes because we deal with so many people, those can be shortcut conversations, they can be abrupt. We're trying to make sure that they are not, that they are fulsome explanations for people, and that takes time and resources, but we need to do that to fulfill our service commitments. So we are also going to be paying attention to the feedback that we get, because we hear some of the same things that you hear, and make sure that we, listen to it, as I've said, but also try to factor in what we can do about it. How can we correct those issues? It's not to say there will never ever be an issue at the CRA, but we need to make sure that we're correcting as much of them as possible, and as many people as possible feel like they're being treated fairly and respectfully by the CRA, and I would want that to be the case in every single interaction that we have. So when we talk about service culture, though, it isn't just the people picking up the phone and talking to you. That's obviously an important element of service, but we are also trying to embed a service culture within the audit and enforcement activities, so that yes, we will ultimately need to make sure that the proper amount of taxes are paid, but we need to go about it in a way that does try to educate first. Let's make sure that there's an understanding and work through, and then that way maybe get some long-term compliance. If people understand the obligations and we understand their situation, hopefully we can get on a path of long-term compliance. Having said that, if there are still issues, we will have to enforce the law and make sure that the proper taxes are paid, because that too is important for the perception of fairness of other Canadians. So I'm very confident that the Chief Service Officer is going to help us refocus our efforts onto providing better service to Canadians, and I look forward to some of the changes have started, but I look forward to even more changes down the road.
Thank you, Mr. Richards, then Mr. Fragascatis, then Mr. Dussault. Mr. Richards.
Yeah. So, given what we've already heard from the Auditor General's report about this very different take that there has been towards different types of taxpayers, from your everyday sort of regular Joe taxpayer to someone with a big offshore account, and the very wide differences in how they're being treated by Revenue Canada. I want to raise an example that I've raised with your minister and with yourselves before. I'm trying to determine whether this is something that falls in the same vein here, and it's the issue around the small business deduction and eligibility for that, where something is being considered a specified investment business and being then considered ineligible. And it's something that's affected campgrounds and self-storages and other businesses like that, where they're being considered to derive their income solely from the value of the land and rents that come from it, rather than from the services that they provide. And it's based on the fact that in many cases they don't have 5 full-time year-round employees. Of course, in the case of a campground, they might have far more than that, but not year-round, because we're in a cold winter country. So I'm wanting to ask you, is this the type of, when you were given direction by this government to go after tax evaders, is this the kind of person or entity that you were going after as a tax evader?
No, let me start on that, Mr. Chair, and I might ask Ted to just comment on some of the more specifics on the compliance activity. No, when we there's 2 things that we do, or more than 2, but at least 2 things we do at the agency. Yes, we want to uncover tax evasion, where people are willfully evading taxes, could be offshore, it could be domestically, but also we need to make sure that we collect the taxes that are due under the law as it exists right now. And so in that case, and the campgrounds would be an example of that, where the law says what shall be done, and our job as administrators is not to redo the law, but to actually administer that law in the fairest way that we can. So those examples will come up in a whole range of cases. Sure. It could be campgrounds, as you've mentioned. It could be some place where expenses are being misallocated between personal and business. There's a number of places where, through our verification and review process, we just need to make sure that the taxpayer is complying with the law.
Sure. Let me interrupt you there. I get what you're saying. You're saying that you have to ensure that the law is being complied with. So, this was something that was identified a number of years ago as being a problem, that this was affecting businesses that shouldn't be affecting. And that's why in the 2015 budget, our previous Conservative government put in place a review of these rules. to try and determine how this could be improved so that businesses like campgrounds and self-storages and those who shouldn't be affected by it were no longer being affected by it. Now that review began, and all but one of the submissions that were received during that review indicated that this was an unfair rule and offered that it needed to be changed to no longer have this chilling effect on these legitimate small businesses. Unfortunately, in the 2016 budget, of course, the new Liberal government at that time canceled that review before it was completed. I wonder if you can tell me what led to the cancellation of that review. Was that something that you recommended?
I can't really comment on it, and I certainly don't think I was there when the review was canceled, so I have nothing to add on, that.
So you don't know whether the agency made any recommendations about the review, what should be done, whether it should be canceled, whether something should be proceeded with? You have no idea as to what took place with that review or what the results were?
No, I can't comment on that. The only thing that I would say is if I were thinking about a review like that, it would encompass both administrative and policy aspects. And so to the extent that it was looking at the policy side and for a legislative change, it would be something obviously that the Ministry of Finance would be looking at. But I don't have any further information with me. I don't think Ted does either. No, so okay. I don't think we can respond.
So there was a review conducted and it was canceled, but you have no idea. The agency has no idea what took place, what recommendations were made. You have nothing to say about it at all. You have no idea
I have nothing. Honestly, I don't know anything about the circumstances of that.
Yeah, I guess it's really unfortunate we didn't have the minister chose not to stay for longer than half an hour because apparently she would be the one that could address this, and here she is not being accountable. It's another example of why this is a problem. You can't tell us anything about this. There was a review that was put in place. You can't tell us anything about what happened. You can't tell us anything about it. What it recommended. You have no idea. And the minister who should be responsible to answer to this is no longer here. This is really quite unfortunate.
You're allowed to ask a question in the House, maybe. Mr. Hamilton.
Maybe the only thing I can do,
but I don't get any answers there either, Mr. Chair.
The only thing I can commit to is go back and see if there's anything that I can know. But I would expect that the Minister of Finance would.
If you could, sorry to interrupt, but if you could, that would be great. If you could provide any information that you can about this review and what took place and what recommendations were given as a result by the agency, if you could provide those to the committee through the
Mr.
clerk,
Hamilton, provide them to the clerk. Mr. Gallivan, did you have something you want to add in this whole series?
I think this issue has been raised before, and we did take a look back. I think the review you're referring to is a review conducted by the Department of Finance on proposed legislative change, so that would be within the purview of the Department of Finance. To answer your question specifically, no, that wasn't the crackdown. So if you look at the OEG report at 7.2, when they say we're finding an additional $4.3 billion a year, that isn't in the small and medium enterprise space. That's with multinationals, GST, large, underground economy, et cetera. And so to answer the question, the extra $4.3 billion we're finding per year is not in the space that you're concerned about.
Got us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today, to the officials, I should say. First of all, we keep hearing that the minister didn't stay, the minister wasn't here long enough. I think if my colleagues had their way, we'd be here until Christmas questioning the minister. The minister did not run for the hills, as my colleague opposite said. She was here, she answered questions, and then went to a cabinet meeting. I think you could do worse in life, Mr. Chair. If anyone wants an example of a minister running for the hills, I would remind my colleagues of Julian Fantino, but I know they don't want to go down that route. So let's be honest with ourselves, Mr. Chair. Down that hallway, very good. If I can ask the officials, in looking at the Auditor General's report, we do see that there are some problems, problems that I hope will be worked on. First of all, the Auditor General reports that there has been inconsistent time given to taxpayers to respond for requests for information when audits take place. Particularly, there's differences between those earning employment income versus large businesses. What is the response of the CRA going forward on this? How will this problem be addressed?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We touched on elements of this earlier, and I think our response is both to recognize the different circumstances of an individual with employment income relative to a small business relative to a large business, so that we do need, and as my colleague indicated, we may need different rules in place to get to the right result in all of those cases. But we do take the point that the Auditor General raised, that maybe we need to review our guidance, our rules, our operating procedures, both at the top end in terms of the multinationals offshore. Should we have better rules to give us more strength to compel information to come forward earlier? And then at the low end, as I've said, for people on employment income, regular type taxpayers, we need to make sure that we are opening up the opportunity if there's special circumstances, if people call us, that we're showing the flexibility to extend the rule where it's necessary. So we think that the Auditor General raised a valid point that we are going to look at and try to solve within the context of all the different taxpayers that we deal with.
Thank you very much. If I can follow that up with a question on audit completion times, variations when it comes to particular regions and other issues. I did want to ask a question about international and large businesses. Audits completed in some regions are done much quicker than in others. In fact, there's a discrepancy of about 150 days from one region, best case scenario, to another region, worst case scenario. Could you tell me how the CRA plans to respond to that problem?
Yes, again, another area we've committed to look at the regional discrepancies. I guess the only thing that I would say as we look at it, we do need to keep in mind that the regions can have different workloads that they work on. You might have different sectors at play there that might require more or less time. So that when you just compare across regions, we do need to think about the differences in that regions. And in some cases, we at the CRA will take a workload and put it in a particular region, which could have an impact on their statistics. So all of that to say, we are concerned about consistency. We want to make sure that we leave room for people to make judgments about how to best proceed, but that has to be done within a framework that tries to get the maximum amount of consistency across the country. I would just caution to say that consistency doesn't mean necessarily that each region has exactly the same number, because they might be dealing with different circumstances. But the point is taken, and we've committed to do a review of what we see regionally and see if there's something that we need to fix up. Yeah, sorry, did you have another question?
I do. The CRA waived, this was a key finding in the report, as you know, the CRA waived interest and penalties for some taxpayers but didn't for others. Why was that the case, and what will be done to address this?
In that case, the one thing that's important to recognize, and I will ask Ted to comment on this one, there's two ways that we provide relief. People can request it of the CRA, and we look at that. The other is proactive relief, where we look and we see, did we take too much time, some particular situation occur where we think proactively that we want to provide that relief. And that, again, is an area where we've committed within the response to the Auditor General to say, let's look at our rules for example, what constitutes an undue delay, where we might think that we took too long, and that we take a compensatory action for the taxpayer. The Auditor General's report mentions that we may not be consistent in how we apply that across the board. We may not have clear enough guidelines for our employees. So that's an area that we're looking at to see if there is some improvement. But I will ask Ted to comment in this space as well.
Really quickly, if you can.
Yeah, just quickly to help you understand, when a human auditor is assigned to your file, there's a greater likelihood of an agency delay, and so we proactively consider taxpayer relief in those cases. When it's a more automated interaction, a system-generated letter, we hadn't turned our mind to how to do that because the incidence was a much lower. But as the OAG pointed out, in the interest of fairness, even if there's not a human being assigned, we should turn our minds to how we might offer proactive relief when there's delays on that side, and so we've committed to take a look at that.
Thank you, Mr. Dussault. 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to turn to the second part of the report, which was going to be the point of my second questions to the Minister, which is about managing and reporting on results. I have the impression that sometimes the minister was a bit of a broken record, talking about $1 billion, $25 billion, $78 billion. She used those three numbers a number of times. $1 billion invested, $25 billion recovered, and 78 convictions. Isn't that misleading? Because the methodology is suspect, especially with respect to the $25 billion. So that was going to be my first question. But I want to really deal in my question here with convictions. The minister says that the plan is working. We invested $1 billion and it's working. When it comes to tax evasion or offshore, if the plan is working over the past 3 years since the government came to power, how much has been recovered from offshore tax evasion? I will begin the answer, and I will ask Ted to give some additional details. On the first part, I think that the methodology is solid that we use to calculate the additional revenues. I think the minister is quite right to say that these revenues were obtained through audit, but there are additional steps. Sometimes the case has to go to court. Sometimes there are problems in actually recovering the money and so on. So we set up a committee to examine the situation and take into account all the other steps to come up with perhaps a more accurate number. We also have to deal with the Finance Department, with Treasury Board. There are these other steps, and perhaps we will be able to get a little more detailed and accurate information on the actual amount given these other steps. You asked a question on convictions, and it comes down to timing. In 2012, the agency decided to look at more sensitive cases, not offshore, but more tricky, and the amount went up from 130 million to 1.6 billion. So that's almost 10 times more serious. There has been a more recent decision to really give priority to offshore cases. We have 50 of those. We have announced that in a number of those cases, even those mentioned in the Panama Papers, we are seeing progress, but we don't have convictions in those cases because they take 5, 6, 7 years. But we have these 50 cases that are under court proceedings right now, and this wasn't the case before. Right now, we have these 50 cases that have been investigated. So the short answer is 0. No, it is not 0, but the statistics show that the instructions we've given have led to progress. A third of our cases are now dealing with offshore transactions. So we've given priority to that. But you're right, we do not have 50 convictions. If it's not 0, how many convictions do you have for offshore tax evasion? 1, 2? Well, to begin with, the definition of offshore is not clear. I might say there are 6 cases. You might say there are 4, but we have a lot of investigations and not many convictions at this point, and that's quite understandable given where we are at in our investigations.
For Mr. Ludwig, and then we'll have to wrap up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here this morning. My first question, if I can squeeze in 2, is, Mr. Hamilton, you mentioned in your brief about education and communication with taxpayers to achieve long-term compliance. Can you explain to us what that platform might look like, how you're to raise awareness?
Mistake, we're going till 10:15, not 2:15, so you've got your 5 minutes, Karen. Go ahead.
And then I'll be splitting my time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Hamilton.
Okay, yes. I actually think this is quite important, so it's useful to understand. Probably the best example that we have of what we're trying to achieve is our liaison officer initiative, where we send out someone for new small businesses just to explain, here's your obligations under the tax system. This is what you need to do. So we will send an officer out to have that conversation with the new business. And our hope in doing that, and we are seeing success, is that we can start from a base of wanting to comply, knowing of comply, and then can build that over time we should have fewer problems if we get off on the right foot, as opposed to a world of saying, okay, well, you go figure it out, small business, and then we'll come in later and tell you how you did. We will still have to audit and verify, but we're putting more emphasis on that beginning part of the conversation. And again, our hope is that that will foster good knowledge, good habits, and a good compliance in the long run. And we're trying to apply that in a whole bunch of areas of, can we have some conversations up front with people to help explain what's going on. It could be on the benefits side, but in this case, the Liaison Officer Initiative is probably our best example, but we are also just trying, as we look at our processes where we see something might be going wrong out there, that people are doing things that aren't appropriate with the law, could be inadvertent. Can we have a process of just trying to make sure we talk to them, that there's good understanding, we understand, before we come in with an audit? So that's a general description of the approach that we're taking, and the Liaison Officer Initiative is probably the best example.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. You mentioned about going directly to small businesses. Certainly, as a small business owner, we're well aware in our house how busy the week is, from Monday all the way through to Sunday. Is there any involvement with the platform to reaching out directly to the boards of trade, the chambers of commerce, or industry associations to prepare them with the information so they could actually help their members, with fielding questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, certainly if we look at our outreach and the partners that we have a very active dialogue with organizations like the Certified Accountants, CPA, Chambers of Commerce, others. We really need that to be able to communicate our message effectively. We can do an okay job at the agency, but those partners have networks that if we can get the information to them, they can actually more efficiently disseminate it among their constituents or their members. And so that's very much a part of it. The Liaison Officer Initiative is a pilot of something specific that we're trying, but that's against a backdrop of a lot of conversations with businesses. We also just are finishing our Serving You Better consultations where we go out and talk to communities and businesses about their ideas about how we can improve the tax administration for them. And that was very successful. The last one we ran was in 2016, led to a number of changes. We're out again looking for that. So again, we're hoping to do more and more of this outreach and hearing what people are telling us about their questions about administering the tax system and their suggestions for us on how to improve.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Kelly and then back to Mr. Fergus. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to, Mr. Hamilton, return to something we discussed at public accounts yesterday, and I would have liked to have had time to get the minister on this, and we know that didn't happen this morning. But the Auditor General had raised serious concerns about how the money, additional money, is being spent by the agency. The Auditor General found that it was that the agency could not track amounts of additional revenues resulting from their new funding. So in other words, that there was that they couldn't find evidence that additional funding that your agency has received from this government has resulted in higher revenue, that it can't be measured or calculated. Canadians need to have confidence that their money is being spent properly, and the Auditor General raised concerns about this. So why can't we tell if the money that you've received has actually made a difference in the amount of tax that you have found and collected?
Mr. Chair, again, I'll start on the response, but I know Ted, based on our conversation yesterday, will be able to elaborate. I think there's two issues I just want to clarify before turning it over. One is, can we account for the additional money that we got and how we're spending that? And I think there, absolutely, we can. It's clear how much we've spent, where we've spent it, whether it's hiring new auditors, whether it's investing in IT, whether it's investing in different analytics to give us a better risk-based assessment. So that's one part. Yes, we can identify where we're spending the money. And then the second part, which I think is what you're raising, is so what good is that doing? How much extra money is it bringing in? And what is the incremental impact of having spent that additional dollar wherever we spent it on the revenue that we brought in? And again, we have a methodology that I think does a good job. We have committed to look at whether we could improve that methodology, but maybe I'll just let Ted explain a little bit about how we calculate that incremental benefit.
Yeah, the OEG, again, back to 7.2, confirms that we were over $3 billion ahead of plan. In other words, the expectation would have been that we were at $8.2 billion, and you know, we're at $3.6 billion or $3.4 billion additional. And so the concern isn't are we meeting or exceeding expectations because we're exceeding, it's to what extent do you attribute that to the additional resources. And here the issue is some of those resources went to IT. So $60 million for IT builds, some of it is additional data, we're getting country by country reports, and we have about 5% more boots on the ground. And so the issue between the agency's current approach, what the OEG is saying, what we need to find going forward is, do we take 5% of our resources and put a different t-shirt on them and say, okay, you're the incremental resources and everything you do goes in the incremental bucket and the other 95% go over here? Or do we just say, listen, if we have 5% more, the 5% of the results are attributed to 5%? We did the t-shirt model for 2 years, and we found we were spending a lot of time that could be used pursuing tax issues on counting and deciding who's wearing what t-shirt. And so we went to the ratio approach. The OEG's raised concerns with it. We've agreed to take a look at it. And again, back to our response, our methodology has been vetted with TBS and Department of Finance, so the key stakeholders internally at least were comfortable with it, but we understand transparency is important, and so in our action plan we will look for a better way to make it clear to all Canadians that yes, we are exceeding those expectations.
Well, we have heard that yes, more compliance reviews have taken place and more audits, but we've heard through both media accounts and through activity that I think all MPs have experienced in their constituency offices, parents that have struggled to comply with benefit reviews. We know the debacle over type 1 diabetics. We've heard many comments. In fact, we even heard one yesterday at Public Accounts, a horrific story coming from parents of autistic children. These aren't the types of activities that I think most Canadians have in mind when they are demanding that Canadians pay, that all people pay the amount of tax that is owing, exactly that amount, not more and not less. So, can you comment on what are you doing now to address some of these concerns around, particularly the benefit reviews on single parents, because this is ongoing, and it's. I'll let you address that, please.
So definitely we need to do better. I'll just start with some context, though. The branch that I lead, International Large Business, that's about $8 billion of the annual lead from about 5,000 audits. Very small focus. Regular Canadians, the T4 filers that we talk about, that's about $2 billion of this audit yield. So almost 4 times as much coming from, the proverbial 1%, and $2 billion kind of coming from the 26, 27 million Canadians. So already in our audit yield, you can see disproportionately the funds are coming from sophisticated taxpayers. But when we deal with regular taxpayers, we are focused on better education. When we find a taxpayer making a discrepancy or an error, as we talked about with Northern residents, we're trying to ask ourselves, how can we clarify the guide? How can we work with software developers to give people a prompt to see, don't make that mistake? And we talked about the liaison officer initiative. We talked about outreach. You talked about stakeholders, and instead of just talking to kind of professional accountants, talking to bookkeepers, associations. So I think very much in that high volume, low dollar space, the agency is trying to find ways to help people to get it right from the start.
Oh, okay. Mr. Fergus, we might come back. Did you have a supplementary there, Pat? You didn't have a supplementary.
Go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Fergus.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Puis,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Commissioner. In his report, the Auditor General assessed the efficiency of the voluntary disclosure program, but he did not complete his analysis because the rules were changed along the way. So could you explain what those rules were that were changed? It is true that we changed the program, the voluntary disclosure program, and I will try to explain the changes. Generally speaking, what we changed was aimed at resolving certain problems that existed in the program, and we kept the useful parts of it. We determined that we had to make some changes to the program to make it a little bit more rigorous, as the Auditor General's report mentioned. There were changes, and I will ask Ted to explain.
We think the regular taxpayers who make a mistake, or there could be a spouse passes away and the other spouse wasn't aware of what was taking place financially, we wanted to keep that open. And so those regular Canadians continue to avail themselves of a voluntary disclosure program. But sophisticated taxpayers, taxpayers who pay money for accountants or lawyers to structure their affairs, to really minimize their tax bill, we thought, probably not. That's probably not who we need to be giving strong financial incentives or discounts to come in, and we're increasingly confident of finding them on our own. And so because we have much better line of sight onto aggressive tax planning, cash flows internationally from Canada and other countries, we now have line of sight into worldwide banking information. We were confident enough to severely restrict the voluntary disclosure program for sophisticated taxpayers. We've not fully closed it yet because the proof is in the pudding in terms of the outcomes and whether we're able to take those leads into audits and successful criminal convictions, as we talked about before. But I think we're sending a message too that you can't kind of engage in sophisticated tax planning and then when you worry that the CRA is closed, come in and get a sweetheart deal. And so that's part of the tightening of the program. Just a final point too, we're being a little bit more mindful about obtaining the name of the practitioner or the accountant, the lawyer who set up the tax planning initially, because it is our intention to go find every single other participant. We have a legal tool called an unnamed persons requirement. We go to court and we find out the names of other participants in tax plans and schemes, and so that's something we plan to do as well.
Yeah, just a piece of backdrop to add to that. When we look at the voluntary disclosure program, we do need to think of it in the context of everything else that we're doing globally. And Ted and I are involved in some work at the OECD, which is really increasing the amount of information that we're sharing with other tax jurisdictions. And as we get better and better at that as a group of countries, and we get more information, the need for the kind of information that comes through the voluntary disclosure program can be reduced because to come, and we've already got the information because we've been sharing it. So work in progress still. There's more improvement, but as we look at that program, we do need to think about it in the context of the improvements we're making with information sharing globally.
Y a-t-il du travail qui a été fait par la...
During the work by the CRA to encourage professionals to develop a code of conduct for their activities, instead of really just trying to be as close to the line as they can in their transactions and in their aggressive tax avoidance activities. Are you working with the professional associations to ensure that they have proper advice to give to their clients? The Professional Accountants Association has just started to include this aspect in their training, in their ongoing professional development as well. They are including it. We also have third-party training that we've just implemented, and $48 million in fines was imposed last year on professionals for abusive or incorrect advice and structuring. So yes, the professional orders do have a role to play. There are other ways as well through third-party training and advice.
We'll go to Mr. Richards for 5, Mr. Dussault for 3, and then end with Mr. Sabera. Before I do that, though, do you hear at the top of the organization about lost documentation? I don't know about your offices, in the rest of MP's offices, but we hear too often that documents are sent in, not always tax documents, but sometimes marriage certificate or something else, and when they call CRA, they don't have it. They send another one in, and I've seen it 3 times. Does that reach your office, those kind of stats?
Mr. Chair, yes, I do hear those complaints. People have access to me and can give me their complaints as much as anybody. And it's on that particular issue, it's always disturbing to me to find out that something might have gone wrong within the agency in dealing with the taxpayer, and we do try to correct those as quickly as we can. In the area of lost documents, it may not, in the cases that have come to my attention, it may not be a case of a lost document, but it goes back to an issue that I raised earlier, which is working in silos, where I might send a document into the CRA, somebody gets it, but I'm then having a conversation with another part of the CRA, and they don't have access to that document. And that's one of the things that we're looking at, and it's part of, as I described, a more integrated approach, thinking about it from the taxpayer's perspective. Can we make sure that that conversation is with one agency as opposed to different parts of the agency? I will say that some of the things that have been put in place are valid concerns about making sure that people have access to only the information that they need to have access to. But I do actually think that we might have gone too far in drawing those lines between people so that we can free them up a little bit, still protect privacy, confidentiality, integrity, but have an ability for somebody to really have access to all the information that I've sent in my example and fix my problem. And that, again, I think goes to looking at it from the taxpayer's perspective rather than ours. But yes, I do have those questions. We do try to track them down as best we can, figure out what went wrong and fix it. But some of the cases that have been referred to me are that silo.
Thank you very much for that explanation, Commissioner. Mr. Richards.
Thank you. Let's return to this issue of the Canada Revenue Agency essentially telling some small businesses that they're too small to be a small business. This is, of course, the issue that we discussed earlier. And when I've asked about this issue in the past to the revenue minister, who's no longer here, I've been told, well, nothing's changed. It's all the same as it's always been. Well, we all know that's not true. There was, in fact, an interpretation bulletin that was put out that interpretation bulletin has since caused the reassessment going back a number of years in some cases of a number of small private campgrounds. It's unfortunately put some of these small private campgrounds right out of business because of the expense of going back several years of taxation and, of course, the legal expenses that go with trying to fight revenue agency. This is something that's obviously quite concerning. So what I would like to ask is, obviously because of this review being canceled, because of this interpretation bulletin being put out, and the fact that, we have seen, in fact, the Canada Revenue Agency go after some of these small private campgrounds, can you give us any sense of how many small businesses have been or will be affected by this interpretation change and the cancellation of this review? How many businesses will be ineligible for the small business tax deduction as a result?
Mr. Chair, I don't have those numbers with me. I can certainly undertake to see if I can find them and send them to the committee afterwards. But in terms of the number of businesses, I don't have that information with me.
So you're making decisions and putting out interpretation bulletins without having any sense as to the impact of those decisions and those interpretation bulletins and how many taxpayers this will affect, how many businesses that are small businesses are going to be told that they're too small to be a small business, and you have no idea what the response to that is. Certainly we will be glad to take the information, and I would ask you to please do get that to our clerk, but I find it incredibly troubling that you would not have any idea the impact of a decision like that would be. Maybe you could tell me, if this, and I know that there's these campgrounds, I believe some of them are challenging the Canada Revenue Agency in court, I believe currently. If they're not successful in challenging that, which I certainly hope they will be, because it's despicable to me that's the kind of thing we're doing here. But if they're not successful, how many other models of businesses will the Canada Revenue Agency go after? Obviously what we're talking about here is small private campgrounds, and they're basically being affected for the most part because they're seasonal in nature. Well, there's a lot of other businesses, similar types of businesses to campgrounds, that are also seasonal in nature. Will you be going after them too if this is successful? What other types of business models would you see potentially being impacted here?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to correct the record, I mean, I'm not saying that the people who did the review didn't understand the number. I'm just saying I didn't happen to bring those numbers here with me to this meeting. So I'm happy to go back and research it. But
okay, well, I appreciate that. If you could
frankly, I don't find it surprising that I don't carry all of that information around in my head. I wasn't expecting to comment on it today. So I'm happy to go back and look at that. And I think just on this issue, the important thing for us at the agency is to make sure that we're administering the law as it is intended to be. And that's what we will always try to do and look for. So in this case, I would be happy to look and make sure that is what we're doing. And also, just per our earlier discussion, trying to make sure we have good communication with the people involved so that it's clear what's happening. Even if somebody doesn't like the way that the law unfolds, we do have an obligation, I think, to explain what we're doing and why. But I will try to find the information that you've requested and get back to you.
3 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am sorry to have to do this, but I want to point out a bit of hypocrisy on the part of the Conservative, because they're going back to 2013. They seem to be quite upset about this report, but they governed during 3 of the 6 years that are covered by the audit, because it goes back to 2013. But to get back to the substance here, I want to ask a question on 739, which was the paragraph I think I found the most shocking. It deals with relief provided to taxpayers. So it's 738, in fact. So most taxpayers don't automatically receive relief. They're not dealt with the same way as small and medium-sized business or large businesses or offshore businesses. So it says in 739 that the CRA requires, and it says requires, auditors to provide for relief even when it is not requested by the taxpayer. So some of these taxpayers are considered to be in default, and they haven't even asked for relief, but they are offered it automatically, and the auditors are required to do so in the assessment. So no request is made, the relief is offered. So on what basis is the agency doing this? And what is the connection with the KPMG case? If people are involved in suspect transactions, aggressive tax avoidance, they are offered relief. They are asked to pay a certain amount, and then everything will be let go, and they don't even ask for this kind of relief? To answer your question, I would say two things. First, regular taxpayers that are subjected to an audit receive an automatic letter, and no relief is provided for automatically, as indicated by the OAG report here, because we don't receive many requests for that kind of relief in those scenarios. So we haven't really attended to that. But as we've mentioned in our action plan, we will be changing this. We'll look at whether we can provide the same level of service. We haven't seen the need up to now. Now, on the other point, we have our audits and the timelines. We want to take our responsibilities. If the auditor leaves, for example, it may take a few months before the case is assigned to another auditor. Sometimes we've got the courts involved, and there are delays on that of some months. In some cases, sometimes we've got an assessment. We might have a $1 million interest payment, and we have to look at whose responsibility that delay is. So we are committed to make sure we know whose responsibility the delay comes under and make sure that we deal with it properly.
To adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome again, gentlemen. The CRA detailed action plan, first of all, thank you for the team for putting that together in response to the fall 2018 report from the Auditor General. I wanted to just, two questions. I wanted to ask on the voluntary disclosures plan, and I just want to make sure, I just thought that I had that. Yes, report reference number 7.58. Following up on the voluntary disclosures plan, if you can provide some color where you would like this program to go. It has always been my view that when we encourage people to come forth, it's a good thing. It saves resources, it saves time. We want individuals, first of all, to continue to do that because it increases our compliance rate. So if you can provide some color, that would be great.
Mr. Chair, perhaps I'll start, but Ted may want to augment what I say about the voluntary disclosure program. So I think we spoke about this earlier, and the point that I made is as we look at this program, I think we're going to try to do two things. One, we're going to look back as we've committed in the action plan and see, so what has happened in those cases where there have been voluntary disclosures? Do people remain in compliance? So we have committed to look back and review how the program has been operating and what has happened. But again, looking forward, we also have a commitment ourselves to see, is it generating the kind of results that we want going forward, and in particular, in light of what we're seeing internationally with greater cooperation and information sharing. So that's why I raised that point earlier. If we look at it going ahead, the voluntary disclosure program is a piece of the compliance puzzle, and it occupied a certain place before, and we want to see how it's going and what have been the results of that. But it may be occupying a different place in the future as other things evolve and we get access to better information. So that's the first part, is really what's underlying the Auditor General's report. How can we do a better job of just looking back and seeing what have we learned from the program? What has it done? Are people having the same behaviors and reactions as we thought? But Ted, I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I mean, I'd also just come back to this question of discretion. The Act provides the minister, and she delegates it to officials to exercise discretion. I think in the past we were processing these requests without exercising that discretion and really looking to put the taxpayer at the center of it and say, is this a taxpayer who really is in line with the principles of the VDP, or is this a taxpayer who's kind of trying to take a shortcut to get a discount on their tax bill? And we're going to be applying that judgment more so going forward.
Okay. And a quick follow-up, Chair. In terms of the time limits for audit workloads, the way I view this is that corporations are becoming more complex. Corporate structures are becoming more complex. There's the issue of transfer pricing, and then there's the issue of getting the proper resources to get the audit done and the time involved. I would like to see, much like in accounting, where you have a set of principles rather than sometimes a hard way of regulatory standards, that there is some flexibility for the time periods for audits to get it done and get it done right. I'm not saying for years and years, but providing the flexibility to CRA to ensure they have, A, the resources, but also the flexibility in undertaking a good audit, an exhaustive audit, and something that they can sign off with and be confident on.
Mr. Hamilton, and that'll be the last response.
Just a very quick response to that, Mr. Chair. I think that you're right. As we look at responding to all of these recommendations, we have to, in a sense, strike a balance in a number of cases. And we do need to leave room for discretion to make sure that we get to the right result. But at the same time, I think we did take something away from the Auditor General's report, that maybe there are some principles, some guidelines, some parameters that we can set around time limits that can be helpful to our people. But hopefully we won't go so far to make them overly restrictive so that we can't get to the right result because of the imposed timeline. So it is really trying to strike that balance, which is what we'll be doing as we take this issue further.
Okay, thank you, and thank you all. I would remind you, Commissioner, Vice Commissioner, the committee did table in the House yesterday its pre-budget consultations in advance of the 2019 budget. And there is a number of recommendations in there. There's 99 recommendations. There is a number that apply to CRA. In fact, I will be writing to the Minister on the ones that do apply. So that report is available for your consideration. With that, this will be the last committee meeting for this calendar year, and it being Christmas, I do want to thank all the committee members, the people who work the booths, the analysts, the clerks, Mike Switcher, and everyone else who has assisted the committee during this year. So a thank you to all, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to all as well. So with that, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.